He's playing like a man possessed. Rusty also took it one step further this week.
And so much to talk about. It's not this rugby union show. Welcome back.
Hello, everybody. It is absolutely thundering down here in Johannesburg. I don't know why I'm hearing voices, but that's because of the size of the match that awaits this weekend. The Springboks up against Ireland. The Boks, I feel, are making me Sim a little bit hypocritical because at the start of this endeavor of ours, I was like France, South Africa all the way. That's my biggest match of the year. And now that all of the drama of the past week has gone, I feel like, oh my goodness, we've got Ireland, and surely this must be the biggest match of the year.
It is now, but I must say, I'm actually, I feel for the Boks because each game there's always been like a little bit of something in it. I mean, okay, I know Japan was built on kind of like being back at the scene of the original crime, which is obviously the miracle of Brighton or whatever, but there was no rivalry there anymore. There was no payback. I mean, we'd beaten them twice, since, and comprehensively, and then obviously France with the one-sided beef, that was taken care of with 14 men. And then suddenly Italy became this weird game where you kind of thought, it's just supposed to be a stop on the Kontiki tour, and there we were, like fighting for our lives, as the kids say, and now we're here. It's like with each passing game, the Boks have had some kind of mountain to climb, and they've done well in the first three. It'll be interesting to see what happens here, because you're right in saying, what, you thought France was the biggest game. It was on paper, and up until 2 weeks ago, it was, simply because the All Blacks had beaten Ireland, and quite convincingly. Ireland had fallen away in that last 20 minutes or whatever it was in Chicago, and so everyone is sitting and going, "Oh, there's not much to this Irish side." But what's happened since is that they've kind of like found their feet. They put away Australia good and proper last weekend, and we've lost to Australia. It's quite weird. Also, this weird sort of like we keep playing against teams that beat Australia who beat us, and so if you're tempted to get complacent, it's just like, hang on, wait, they beat Australia who beat us. And so I mean, I looked at their team. Their team is an incredible team. Like that team's basically bulletproof. So that's why you're 100% right. It is once again, or suddenly, the biggest game now. It's also the biggest, maybe hopefully with no respect to Wales. It's probably the last sort of big one we can't properly lose unless unless we go really rogue against Wales and start doing funny things that could end up losing us that game. But you're 100% right. Well, it's not you. Let me put it that way. You're not being a hypocrite. You've gone with the steps. The 4-step plan of the Boks this tour, which is each one is higher than the last one. So it's fair enough, no?
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. It feels like it's getting tougher and tougher each week. Julian reckons I'm talking a lot of cack. He's like, come, New Zealand, South Africa at Eden Park was the match of the year, and we lost. I suppose, given that there were records to be broken. But the thing is, like, we play the Kiwis every year, so we kind of know how we measure up, and we knew from last year that we were going to be, if not win both, we were going to be competitive. But against France, against Ireland, a bigger part, and always that unknown. And we don't really need to talk too much about the record between South Africa and France, and Ireland. But the Irish have had a very good run, I feel, against South Africa, and I'm hearkening back to that 2-test series that they played here, where they won the first test. It was close. Was it 19?
It was the other way around. They lost. They lost the first one at Loftus, and then they went and ambushed us at Kings Park with the drop goal by 1 point. Just a dose of our own medicine, the old one pointer.
Yeah. So I mean, it was really, really, really tough to face them. I felt, and they've got a couple of players back from injuries.
The numbers say everything. Sometimes when you're struggling to sort of weigh up, a game like this, I think the numbers just tell you everything you need to know. These guys have beaten us 4 of the last 5 times they've played against us. We last won in Dublin or Ireland in 2012. That's 13 years. Russie's record against them is 1-1. Obviously, there was the rest of the games in that 4 out of in that 4 out of 5. Not in the 4 games go to Jacques Nienaber, but Andy Farrell has won 3 of the 4 games he's played against the Boks. So listen. We won the World Cup, but we lost to this team, and so you don't really have to look too hard to work out that this is a massive game, particularly for the Springboks. It's probably a bigger game for the Springboks than it is for Ireland. Ireland do need to win to still remind people that they still got it, but with us, it's kind of like. It's basically to settle some kind of score or, set the record straight.
We'll take a look at the 2 lineups, and I think that both sides have gone with the strongest possible. No surprise there. No real surprises. There's no in terms of selection. I think we're over doing any sort of experimentation. There are a couple of guys who are out due to injury as well. And while we do that, do join in the conversation. Drop your comments and any questions that you might have as well. But Sim, before we get into this Irish team, I was made to remember again that there's always niggle between South Africa and Ireland. And I know that we tend to not think of them as the great rivals on the same level as, say, New Zealand or maybe even England and Australia. But whenever these 2 teams take to the field, there always seems to be a lot of stuff that happens on the pitch and even off it. A lot of talk about what this would mean for Springboks if they were to lose the match. And that's at least the articles I've been reading coming out of Ireland, sort of suggesting that if Rassie goes on and loses this match, then the feeling or the sense is that, the Springboks are beatable on any day. Whereas I don't quite see the same level of pressure, at least, can we call it, being placed on the Irish. Sort of for them, it's like, you're coming out to face the world champions, and if you lose, we know it's not going to be all that bad, and we've beaten them before, and it's not going to have any ramifications or implications for the Irish. But I don't know. I don't know if they're trying to make too much of this, and I don't know if they're trying to build up quite a big rivalry before this big match. What's your take, and how do you feel? I mean, what's your experience been with the Irish? Because whenever I talk to people, Ireland has a very great reputation, great fans, they jolly bunch, but they're not so jolly when they lose rugby matches against foes and against teams that they take seriously. It gets really rough sometimes, but that's my experience. What's yours?
Speaking of rough, I just heard like the world's biggest thunderclap outside.
Yeah, I thought your roof was coming down, but I'm also getting it on my side as well.
And I'm not sure my shack is entirely built for this, and so I might have to be careful. Look, there is suddenly it's weird. I think as long as we were beating Ireland, it was okay. We had no issues with Irish fans or Irish players or even the Irish media. Now suddenly, that they have sort of bloodied the Springboks' noses a whole host of times, and then we've kind of gone on past a World Cup quarterfinal or 2 since they became competitive. It has kind of picked up. Obviously, we culturally appropriated. One of their songs, the Cranberries' "Zombie," and then and then we bastardize it by using Russie, and that should piss them off a fair bit. So there's a lot going on that that has built it into an actual rivalry. That's whether you like it or not. It's one of those situations where if you ask anyone about South African rugby, they'll say to you, the big rivalries is basically North versus South, which is Province against the Bulls. But Sharks against the Bulls is a real thing. It may be sort of a new rivalry if you want to look at it that way, but it's a real thing. It may have only started in 1990, but it is a real thing. And I think Ireland kind of falls under that bracket where you sit and you're like, sure, it's not the All Blacks because it doesn't have the the history and the tradition. It's not it's not England because it doesn't have the history of the countries, the whole Boer War thing. It doesn't have that, but it does have kind of like a status as a rivalry simply because right here, right now, they're a team we can't beat, or we were a team that they struggle to beat. When those two teams come together, it's always a classic of sorts. And then there are other like bits and pieces. You've got with us, you've got Rassie Erasmus who's practically won everything in charge of the Boks, but doesn't have a winning record against this one team.
Do you think? I know I'm jumping in here. Do you think that maybe when I look at Jacques and Rassie, there's maybe a little bit of too much, and that's not really fair for me to say, but reverence for the Irish. Their players, they know those systems, they know the script.
Because they were part of it,
right?
No. The yes part is it would be weird if they were not sort of like if they didn't feel some kind of sort of respect towards people who kind of like gave them a home when they didn't have one in South Africa, if you want to call it that. Their time in Munster was kind of like away from South Africa, almost not willingly so. That's the first part. But by the same token, I also think that in their hearts of hearts, they know one thing and one thing only, which is, oh, come on, we've got more talent than they do. Why would we lose to these guys? Sure, they use their talent particularly well. They're very good at making sure that pretty much every player that gets into the system comes through. But I think there is that level of dismissiveness on their part that why would we be losing to these guys? We've got, I don't know, 10 times as many professional players as they have, or that was just a number I plucked from my head. There probably is an element of that, but it's also, the other thing that makes it gives it a derby feel is also the fact that, Rassie and, Jacques Nienaber now works at Leinster, having worked at Munster with Rassie. And, the fact that Erges Snyman plays for Leinster, who dominate the 23 of Ireland, and therefore will be playing against these teammates. There's all these little Felix Jones, Jerry Flannery. There's also like how much we know about them and how much they know about us, and it's all those bits and pieces. I don't think it's any one thing that you can look at and be like, that's why there's a bit of needle. And we haven't. I mean, we used to think Irish fans were cute because they got a nice accent. You talk about the Guinness and you talk about all this other stuff, but when they're on top, they can be quite cocky. So are we. And so, there's a mutual dislike in that terms. Off the guys on that show Off the Ball, they irritate the crap out of me. I cannot stand listening to them. And so, I mean, I imagine if they had to listen to us, they'd probably be getting a bit worked up too. So everything has just conspired to turn this into the rivalry. I'll call it the rivalry that World Rugby didn't know it needed.
Right. Yeah. I go with that. And in fact, yeah, that's a very good point when you talk about just the media and the type of things that you will hear from an Irish perspective. And if you are watching this in South Africa, do yourself a favor, and if you have the option to try and switch the different language options, closer commentary if you want to have a party, but if they've got the international commentary as well, it's quite interesting to see the take of what the other side thinks. And likewise, if you're in Ireland, you have the opportunity to listen into the South African commentary. I always find that's a very interesting exercise because you might be surprised, like, oh my goodness, these guys don't like us at all, or wow, they have such reverence and support and whatever respect for us. But just as a rugby fan, do yourself the favor. I think it makes things much more interesting. When you spoke about Jacques, I was wondering if you'd seen Julian's question there.
No, I didn't. I was going to say the big thing for me is that these guys clearly think we are Neanderthals. You know what I mean? You can tell. You listen to them talk. They still think of the old Boks, the Boks that just, when they did get red cards, it was because it was something crass that Buckies did, and they cannot divorce themselves from that kind of thinking about the Springboks. And the simple fact of the matter is that the Boks have brawn and brains, and actually, what the Boks don't really like about them is I think they think that, the Irish, this is now the team in particular and their coaches, they kind of like, they think they're so smart, they're so clever with how they do things. And so that's kind of like where the little cultural clash is between the two teams. One is kind of seen, and wrongly so, to be stupid, and the other one is not only seen to be clever, but it also believes itself to be so clever, to the point where, like, they have to kind of like show it. And that's where the needle, that's kind of like where the needle is. And I'm sorry, I haven't seen Julian's message.
Well, it was just about Jacques, and I mean, I think you addressed it because you asked, with Jacques coaching at Leinster, how much will that help the Irish when it comes to reading the Boks defense on Saturday? And I actually seen a quote from Arthur Sneeman saying, basically, when it comes to these two teams, there are no secrets. Everybody knows what to expect. Rassie could maybe try something outrageous, as Rassie might, but I look at the selection and I think, yeah, he's going out there and wants a full 80-minute performance. The bench looks strong, and for Ireland, the big test, I think, or the challenge is going to be to last the 80.
Look, I'll start with the defense question. The defense question is quite simple. Of course, they've learned everything. They've learned, in a way, they've learned how to defend a lot like us. And while Jerry Flannery, they know a lot about how he works. And so either way, it doesn't matter how you want to look at it. It doesn't matter how you want to look at it. Everybody knows in this aspect, everybody understands everybody's defense. And so it's not going to be an issue. And even before, when it was Jacques' defense, these guys still gave, the Boks more than they can handle in with ball in hand. So I don't think anything has particularly changed in that respect. And like Ergir Snyman says, these guys study each other, like they know everything about each other, which I think is fair enough. But looking at the two teams, I mean, I would have gone with you when you say, like that they bench, the wheels of their bench might come off in the last 20 if this was 3 weeks ago. I think now they've kind of hit their groove, and
let's see that Irish team anyway. Well, yeah, as we get into it, Paul, if you've got that for us, that'd be great. But continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so my thing,
the Irish one.
Ireland first.
Thanks, Paulie. Yeah, sorry, Sim.
I mean, they were with this, and that's pretty much every single guy you would have expected, and every guy that's starting there is first choice. And then, you look at the bench to come on. I always like the way they go with their bench. It doesn't matter what the Boks do. If the Boks go 7-1, if the Boks go 6-2, they don't care. They go 5-3 because 5-3 is their DNA, for want of a better phrase. And so I look at that team and I think, okay, cool. This is a team to give the Boks, a few headaches. You look at that front row, Andrew Porter. I know he hasn't scrummed straight since he was a teenager, but it is still Andrew Porter, probably the strongest rugby player in the world. Dan Sheehan is Dan Sheehan. Wasn't he World Rugby Player of the Year nominee a couple of years ago? Ty Furlong, the only tight head prop I know who can throw a 40-meter pass. Those blocks don't need anybody.
Probably the best tighted prop for a little while there.
Yeah, and then you've got that loose trio. It's so balanced, and Josh van der Vlier is back to reprise his he's Richie McCaw sort of, because after Richie McCaw, I think he gets away with the most murder and open side flank I can get away with. Kalen Doris, I hope he stopped the croc roll, because we still remember from Durban. We haven't forgotten. Malcolm Marks will be there to remind him.
He was for them in that series though, and he also came back from a bit of an injury, and he looks like he's getting stronger.
Incredible player. He's incredible. He's a really good player. But all I want is, if something like that happens, can they get a card like we would, etc., etc., etc.? Because I don't want to go down this path, because we've done it so much this week, and we've been criticized so much for raising it. You just want the reaction from the referee or the officials to be the same. If you've injured someone, if you've hit someone high, it needs to be a thing. It needs to be turned into the thing that it is. And so, this is probably the strongest possible Irish team they could put together. And it's got everything. It's got that experience, all that experience that has obviously gotten it all these Grand Slams, these Six Nations titles. Unfortunately, hasn't gotten them through World Cup quarterfinals. But it's also got some youngsters coming through. Paddy McCarthy is young, but you can tell he's going to be proper. The jury's out for me. Is still out on Finlay Bealham. Can't trust a tight head prop with corners. Cannot do it. It's impossible. You shouldn't be able to do that. So yeah, look, I really like this team, and we saw last weekend Mac Hansen with that first half. First half hat-trick against the Aussies. It's an incredibly good team, and if this was the Boks playing them any other year, you would be like, yeah, the Boks will probably lose this one. But obviously, given what the Boks have done this year, you fancy their chances as much as you respect Ireland, if that makes sense.
I'm also seeing a lot of similarities between the two selections, and we'll pop up the Boks team just now. But, I look at that fly-half battle that, you've got these two young guys. They've gone with the exciting talent. I love that they've gone with Sam Prendergast to start at fly-half. I guess there is a bit of a... call it a security blanket on the bench, but up against Sasha Feinberg Ngomezulu tells me that although these teams like to generally or historically keep things tight, those two tens are going to try and run stuff. They're going to try little dink chips. They're going to try things, which is not necessarily what I would expect in the lead up to a South Africa-Ireland test match. I would think it's going to be all brawn. It's going to be 80 minutes of attritional sort of play. But when I look at those two selections at 10 and the two nines as well, in Jameson Gibson Park and Kobus Reinach on the South African side, there's quite a lot of experience at 9, not so much experience at 10, but, you got a little bit of, shall we call it razzle-dazzle? And I think that makes this a little bit of an unknown from what we might have seen in the last sort of, say, 4 or 5 matches.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because Sam Prendergast only came in after Jack Crowley was deemed to not have been particularly great against the All Blacks.
Yeah.
So they went with him, and I think Sam himself had kind of like, I can't remember which game he didn't particularly do well in the last time for Ireland, for them to kind of like think, okay, we might be going with Crowley now. So it looks like Crowley's back. I mean, sorry, Prendergast is now back on, is now back on the saddle, as it were. And then what's going to happen next is, you're going to put him up against Sasha. What Sam does particularly well for me is, he's a wonderful passer of a rugby ball, and he's got that whole Jonathan Sexton thing, because obviously he grew up in that Sexton system, if you want to call it that, at Leinster. But if he does have a shortcoming, it's he's not the greatest defender I've ever seen, and I suspect there'll be a lot of people running down his channel. There'll be a certain Damien Dialende, rumbling down that channel. Yeah. Maybe that's why they got him Bandi Aki, maybe as a bodyguard, for the guys that are going to be making a beeline for Prendergast's channel. The funny thing for me, you talk about Sasha as well. The funny thing is, Sasha being Sasha, he might fancy a go himself at that channel, right? Because he likes the physical stuff. Forget out passing him, out kicking him, and all these other funky things. He might actually be like, what, I want to run straight at you. Let's just see if you're gonna put the shoulder in. Let's see what happens when I do run into you. But you're 100% right. It's gonna be an absorbing battle of its own.
Yeah, I love that man for man. There's a great battle. We'll take a look at the Boks team just now. But Emmanuel, always good to see you in the comments. And he asked a question when we're talking about the coaches. Do departing coaches get subjected to NDAs or restrictions of trade clauses when they leave? And he says it seems there could be a lot of IP that's acquired at the right price from a departing coach. And I don't want to lie, Emmanuel, I have heard stories in the past of sometimes people moving from teams because they have the inside scoop, not necessarily because they're going to serve a greater coaching role. So it's one of the reasons people do move. And no, there is no restraint of trade as far as I'm aware from coaches. Your IP is your IP. That's why you've been hired. And it does make things quite interesting because there is a lot of knowledge that goes back and forth. That said, there are a lot of coaches as well. Well, I say a lot. Maybe this was a thing of the late 90s, early 2000s, of coaches who loved sharing things. And you'd almost think from an outsider's perspective, they're sharing a little bit too much. And the one guy I remember doing a lot of this was Dickie Muir. And he would do that at the Sharks. He would call every local Super Rugby coach at the time and sort of tell them, this is what we're doing in our preseason. I reckon, boys, that this season upper body strength is going to be the big thing. That's when we've gone with Greco-Roman sort of wrestling, and as part of our build-up. And so it's a weird space, rugby, because you always hear these allegations of spying and cheating. We heard it from Macrosi and the French a couple of weeks ago. But the reality is, and Sim, I think you mentioned that you saw a coach or a couple of coaches in Port Elizabeth. This happens all the time. Coaches are friends. They know each other. They share much more than I think most fans would be comfortable if they'd found out. Because it's one of those, if you know a guy, you've known a guy for a couple of years, you've been competitive, you've met a couple of times, his wife, his kids. I think the general sense is, if you want to go far in this game, a rising tide will raise all ships. So, yeah, they do take that knowledge elsewhere, and it is a little oddity with rugby. Unless you've experienced different.
Now, look, put it this way. It would be impossible to give off your best in your new job. Say you're Jacques Nienaber, and obviously your job is senior coach, which is his actual job description at Leinster. Who deals with defense. it's impossible for you to give, like the best version of that, of your teachings of that defense, without letting slip of a few secrets. You probably need to use the Boks as your example, that at the Boks we used to do this, and already you've kind of straying into that territory where maybe you're sharing a little bit too much. So some of the crazy stuff I've heard is, even if a guy is having a few issues, and now obviously I have now moved on to another example, as in I am not speaking about Shark. If a guy is, is having problems at home, and the opposition doesn't quite know it, but this guy obviously is privy to that. Sometimes it does get shared. Anything to get that, to get that edge, and it doesn't matter. Your loyalty is to your latest paycheck. It's not to someone you no longer work with. It's always to your latest paycheck. And so I have no doubt that guys do share. It's a bit like, I'll give you a great example. A great example is a cricketing example, which is the IPL. One of the great things that the IPL was created almost to do, I don't think that's why they created it, but that's what. That's one
Your
of the
conspiracy theory. I like this. Let's hear this.
You literally get so many overseas players who come in. Say, in the old days, guys didn't know how to deal with Dale Steyn, and now suddenly they training, they're practicing against him, and he's telling them, he's talking to them as teammates, like they know what he's like. The coaches are analyzing him from close up, and before long they take that information up to the Indian national team with them, and suddenly they're no longer afraid of Dale Steyn, because they've spoken to him, they've had a few drinks with him after matches, flying up and down in India during the IPL. And so, I mean, the IPL is the greatest example of how sort of IP in sport spreads like wildfire, and as a result breeds the right kind of competitiveness. You might not like it that, oh, suddenly they know too much, but it is the right kind of competitiveness, because the whole point is for the game to be stronger, not for one set of people to be, one team to be strong and everybody else kind of like lagging behind. So I have absolutely no problems with it. But yeah, I think the IPL is a great example of basically how this whole IP thing sort of gets transferred like COVID.
And just to put a ribbon on it, Emmanuel, on your question, the one thing that I'm also very wary of is that a lot of coaches serve their apprenticeships elsewhere, or they get their coaching sort of badges elsewhere. A lot of South Africans didn't realize that Peter de Villiers got his first coaching badge in Wales, for instance. Someone like Mpho Biyozo went down to New Zealand and was coaching in Canterbury. For a little stint, and I still want to see him be back coaching in SA and doing great things. But it happens all the time. People move around and they know each other, and you make friends, and it's rugby, so you make friends for life as well. I know Jules was asking something about Rowan Nortje, and that question, Jules, requires the Springbok team. So, Paulie, if you've got that Bok team up, and I was saying earlier that I'm particularly fascinated by the, player versus player, man for man. I find this a fascinating battle, maybe I should start with the forwards, Andrew Porter, Bowen Finter, both at one, Dan Sheehan on the other side, Malcolm Marx, Furlong, Thomas Dudoy, who's, I think, getting so much better. And then the two locks, Esabeth and Nortje up against James Ryan, Tyke Byrne. I love these battles. Even the loose trio seems quite well balanced on either side. But Jules's question is a little bit naughty, I suppose. And it was something that people had asked. He asked, can Rowan Nortje break the curse of the red card number 5? Sim, do you think maybe he'll start this off the bench? Might have an extended bench and run on with 14, and then after 15 minutes, you can have the full complement.
Yeah, I remember in the old days when they named a team and there was one player they weren't quite sure of, and they called him AN other. I think the Bok number 5 is now, a red card, like basically in brackets, sitting around and waiting. Look, Ron's is a totally different kind of player. I would be impressed if lightning struck 3 times. It's already struck twice though, so maybe I shouldn't get too carried away. But yeah,
It could be the luck of the. It could be the luck of the Irish. Sim. Could be the luck of the Irish.
yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I just don't see it happening again. Look, I won't lie to you. There might still be a raid somewhere else. In which case, this is probably the worst team to have. This is probably the worst team to have a red card against, because they are very much a structured team, and you would imagine that as part of that structure, there are all kinds of plans on how to exploit a red card. In many ways, as good as the Boks were in stemming the tides against France and against the Italians with 14 men, the French and the Italians, maybe thanks in no small part to how emotional they are, sort of temperament as nations, maybe they did also give a textbook display in how not to try and exploit, having an extra man. If we do that this time around, I promise you, we will be punished. There's no way we're winning that game. So yeah, it's like I said, I don't see it happening, but if it does happen, we got problems.
Well, Liam, thanks for your comment. And hey, if you're listening in and you want to comment, if you want to share, if you want to ask, go for it. We love hearing from you. Liam saying, why do you think Rassie, great show, guys, so thank you very much for that. Why do you think Rassie went with Caden over Ethan at wing? Similar types of players, similar builds, similar strengths. I'll tell you my conspiracy theory, and then Sim, you jump in. I think that he went with Kanan because Kanan's actually had a pretty good tour, to be honest. He looked so good the last time he was on the field. And also, just in case they decide to stick a couple of bombs up, I don't know if there's anyone better, maybe bar Damian Willemse, like we saw in the last outing, who's better at just defusing those. So that's my take. I just think it's a form thing. And also, I think that next week, with the Welsh game and a couple of players not available because it doesn't fall in the international window, the younger guys will get a run. So I think Ethan is a shoe-in for next week, and maybe that's why. But those are my theories. What's when you get your tinfoil hat on?
I would say the first things first. I'd say Kenan's the more experienced player.
As well.
I know they're only separated by a year. Kanan's 23 now, finally, and Ethan's 22. But Kanan's the more experienced player. Kanan has played probably more wing than Ethan, and then over and above that, I think Kanan gives the Boks the variety of player because he's played more center again as well for the Boks. He can be considered an out and out. We didn't learn anything about Ethan playing at center for the Boks last week because he didn't play much at center. He probably did for about 10 minutes, and we didn't learn anything. So I think it's just one of those. And then just maybe from a superstitious perspective, I think Kanan's played something like 21 games and lost one for the Boks. So he is a bit of a good luck charm as well. I mean, obviously that's got nothing to do with, with them playing. That's just pure superstition probably. But yeah, I just think Kanan gives them a bit more from an experience perspective, a bit more from a utility option, even though it's weird. It sounds counterintuitive to say he offers more than Ethan from a utility perspective, given that Ethan basically plays 4 positions, which is both centers and both wings, but he hasn't played, he hasn't played those positions, for the Boks. Whereas what Kanan can be trusted with, with the Boks, this is obviously outside center and wing, and then I think marginally better at the high ball than Ethan. Yeah, I think he's also, and in this game, the high ball will decide who's king. The high ball will be absolutely everything. I called Kanan air moody, just because of what he's like under the high ball, because he not only does he jump really high, he then he sort of like turns in the air, and and then basically protects the ball that way, and he almost always seems to come back with it. And so that's what I would be saying, if I were to try and sort of weigh the two players up. But still, for me personally, what I'd much rather see is the two of them playing together as opposed to one or the other.
Yeah, no, I look at the selection on the backs, and it's so difficult to know what the lineup could potentially look like when we go into that final quarter, because what Rassie does have is a couple of the utility players, like you say. He's got a couple of Swiss Army knives. Sasha covers 10 and 15. Kanan can cover 13, 14, 11, 15, Damien 10, 12, pretty much any other position on the back line. He's got the other very utility player on the bench in Andre Esterhuizen, who can come in on the centers, will come in at flank if needed. Grant Williams will cover the wing. Mani, well, he'll be strictly to cover fly half. But then again, the names that I've mentioned have got pretty much all of those other positions in tech. So I have absolutely no idea what things are going to look like when that match comes to an end. Jules is being unfair again. Oh, well, first let's start with Paul. Paul says, what do they give these Oaks for the photo shoots? Paul, they give them absolutely nothing. I think what they look excited because they're not actually out having an off-fork sessie or on a treadmill or anything. Yeah, Jules is being unfair. Like I said, he wants predictions. I hate these, Jules. Absolutely hate them. But yeah, Sim, I mean, it's so very difficult to call anyone against the Springboks at the moment, even an Irish team that is starting to fire on all cylinders.
I'm going in the Boks by 5 or less.
Yeah, I think this is a safe one to go within a score, within a try. 5 or less makes absolute sense to me. Yeah, I'll go Boks by like 2 or 3. I think we're going to be really scared. Squeaky bum time when we get towards the end of the match. We are going to, before we wrap up, there's a big change coming in the world of rugby. Nations Championship starting next year. And I hate these things because next thing we know, Stanza has launched all of this, the Six Nations as well, and you don't really get too much time to consider what this might mean, what impact it might have. I do like the North versus South. I do like that we rotate and we get to play every one of the Northern Hemisphere teams in one calendar year. But I'll tell you what I don't like after I hear your take from the tournament. I think there are a lot of positives, but just one or two little negatives.
Look, I like the fact that it's not more games. So it replaces what had become a reasonably pointless window. The incoming and sometimes the end of year tour. So I'm glad that it's almost like in cricket replacing the bilateral, just making sure that when you're playing towards something. And so everyone has gone on for years about the North versus South. Well, here it is. It's actually happening, and there'll be a winner crowned. There'll be a winner crowned at the at the end of each year or whatever. And I don't mind that, because I feel it also gets the teams closer. So you don't have the Southern Hemisphere doing their own thing and the Northern Hemisphere, running away with things themselves. And so everyone kind of like can keep an eye on everybody else all the time. And as a result, I generally don't mind this. And then over and above that, I think if we can start talking like this and having competitions like this, we're getting one step closer to that global season.
Yes, yeah, I absolutely agree. The only downside, really, and I need to be fair, is it does feel a little bit Super League-y. You remember when the English Premiership decided that they want to separate themselves from the mere mortals, and it. I would love to see an opportunity for someone else to have, maybe it's a one-off test, or maybe something happens in that big super weekend that they're going to have at Twickenham, to determine the ultimate league champion. And I'm not saying you want these lopsided games, but we've seen it in the past. Argentina got better after having to endure playing the All Blacks, the Springboks, and the Wallabies year in, year out. And I think probably without much hope in the first couple of seasons, but look now. And I take Fiji as well and their improvements, and, the players playing in Super Rugby Pacifica and being exposed to tougher levels of competition and playing in France and all of this stuff. It definitely matters. So if we want to uplift the second tier, we are going to have to include them in games against some of the top teams. And sometimes it's going to be lopsided, but it can't be right for a team like a Namibia or a Zimbabwe for the next World Cup to not having faced any tier one sides and then automatically being thrown into a pool at the World Cup where you might come up against the All Blacks. I find very, very unfair, and because I don't think anyone's fault, but we do need to get these guys playing sort of cross tiers.
Of course, it's somebody's fault. There's no such thing as it's not somebody's fault. Somebody decided that we're going to go with the tier one and not go with the tier two. Look, my solution would be the tier two nations should have a concurrent competition at the same time. And then at the end of each season, in inverted commas, what you then do, the winners of the second tier and the bottom team in tier one swap places.
Yeah. Wait, you mean Wales?
No. That's not what I said. That's what you said.
Sorry.
But yes, call it Wales for now. Whoever finishes last, basically, you get relegated and the other team gets promoted. And then you kind of like maybe, because I think sometimes competition itself is important at all times, but you're still 100% right. I'm not sure it's enough. It's enough facing up against the bigger teams. What I'm saying is a solution, but I don't think it's a solution for what you're saying, which is those teams, the Portugals need to come down here like they did last year. Right. The Georgias need to come down here like, they did this year and they did in, was it 2021?
And they gave the account of themselves.
Yeah, and that's how teams improve. It's been proven before. It's not going to change. That's how teams get better, that by playing better opposition and not just playing amongst themselves. So what I have said is a solution, but I'm not sure it's the solution.
Well, at least it's a step in the right direction. We'll wrap things up, but Emmanuel, thanks for your comment, and I think it harkens to that. The Nations Championships and the greatest tour ever seem to be squeezing out tier two opportunities against tier one teams. Feel a bit uncomfortable with these, despite Bok dominance. Absolutely agree. I think hopefully there'll be a bit more of a concerted push to see how they can include the tier two teams. I mean, I find it very sad sometimes and the participants for the 2027 Rugby World Cup are now determined. But, you look back over the years and there are a couple of teams that just never make it back in. I think of like a Russia, for instance, who were very, very popular. Where was it? Was it in France in was it 2011? I can't remember which of the World Cups they made.
Was it not 2019?
Was it 2019? Was it Japan?
No,
it wasn't Japan. But this is exactly the point, is that, if you play for any of these teams, maybe once in a generation, you'll get to go to the World Cup, if you've been able to cobble together a particularly good team. And I kind of feel sad. I would like to see some more contest or competition for these guys and give them something with prestige to fight for as well. They're not going to go out and win the World Cup, the tier two teams. So like you say, so maybe looking at another competition running concurrently at the same time would be absolutely fantastic. Well, we're going to call it there. It's a biggie match. Me and Sim called it by within a score. What say you? Drop your comments in. Give us a like, a share, and a subscribe as well. We'll be back on Sunday morning after the aftermath, and I'm gonna try and find Guinness for the weekend, but it doesn't taste the same in South Africa. So it's not the same Guinness. It's not the Irish Guinness. It's a different Guinness.
Yeah,
but
of course it doesn't. Listen, I don't drink that stuff anyway, so I'll just stick to the South African Guinness, which is Savannah or something.
There you go. It also has some side effects that if any of you have drunk Guinness, you might not necessarily want me to repeat on the stream, so I won't. But let's see. It's
extremely operative word.
Yeah, no, let's not. Stream being operative word. Definitely time to call it. We're going away. It's going to be a big match. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to your comments. And on Sunday, we'll get an opportunity to touch on the other results as well, because the other big teams will also be calling it. It'll be the end of their international break. But like I say, the Boks continue on, and we'll move on to Cardiff to face Wales. Sim, always good. Welcome back to That Rugby Union Show. Well, what a week it's been.
He's playing like a man possessed.
And so much to talk about. It's not this Rugby Union Show. It's That Rugby Union Show.